Now, let's go over something that I'm sure is going to happen this morning. Actually, it'll be sometime this afternoon once the power freaks are in place. Because, after all, they're only there for the working people, comrade. That's right. Don't you know? They're there for the working people. Oh, thank goodness. Now we're going to have good old Osama Mugabe in place. All of the wrongs of the world are going to be replaced with rights. No, wait a minute, you can't say that. They're going to have to be left. But anyway, here's how it works. Let me ask you something. By this afternoon around 4 o'clock, there's going to be this grand announcement made in which, with change, because you know we're going to have change, and there's a lot of change, and that change will be very significant because it will be change. And the change will mostly be the names on the doors as they scrape them off, off the glass, and the guy's there with a little paint. He's been doing it all this week. He's just not caught up on all of them yet. And he's going to get the last name painted on the last door, and we'll have change, at least with the names. That'll be about it. Anyway, we're going to have this announcement talking about the greatest fraud against the American people perpetrated against them by a number of people, but climaxing with the traitor Mr. Rosenfeld / Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay? What we're going to do is we know that Osama Bama Ding Dong is going to step forward and he's going to tell you all about the Strawman. Now, what is the Strawman? Let's go right from the beginning on this, because, we've talked about this quite a bit. We got a lot of new listeners this morning. I know that. We always have more coming into the fold from different directions, Internet, AM and FM, and all the other list of tools that we use. So, what is the Strawman? Where did it come from? Well, it's a corporate myth. It's a corporate fiction created to milk fictional money or move fictional money in the bond market. And many other instruments are created from the Strawman and move through the system, but you're supposed to be totally ignorant of it. Now, there are certain people who are not. And I would point out right off the bat that every bar member in the United States knows what I'm going to be talking about here. Every bar member, being a representative of the BAR, an acronym, British Accredited Registry, okay, the British Accredited Regency, okay, the representative of the Crown in places where the Crown can't be at that moment, in other words, royalists, well, they all know. Now, we'll touch on that again in a minute, but just keep that in mind. Every bar member knows what I'm going to be talking about here. So, years ago, back in 1933, they started this, when Franklin Delano Mr. Roosevelt, took over. He created a series of crises. Now, one of them, of course, was a declaration of war against the American people themselves by the Corporation of the United States. This is known as the War Powers Act. This declaration of war was directed against the American people in a fictional national crisis that did not exist. The only crisis was the crisis that for the banksters, the American people were stepping away from them and progressively should have been much more aggressive than they were. They were nice, but that's the problem. In 1929, the Great Depression hit. Just a little follow-up here. And the money supply disappeared, exactly like what you're progressively going to be seeing here, and to a degree there was hyperinflation, but even though there was lots and lots of paper being printed, it only matched a percentage of the fictional numbers, gee, sound familiar, that actually were on the books. The Federal Reserve notes did not catch up with the fictional digits because it's a Ponzi scam. It will always be musical chairs with never enough paper printed to match the interest and the debt, because basically, here's the explanation, you can't pay a credit card with a credit card. Interest continues to accumulate and pile up, which is exactly what the plan was behind passing the Federal Reserve Act back in 1913. Well, in 1929, the machine was kicked in, came to a head, and the Great Depression hit. By 1931, actually by 1930, people asked, well, where's the money supply? You couldn't find two nickels to rub together. Hell, you couldn't find two pennies to rub together. Why? Well, when they called in all these debts, the internationalists, the globalists demanded currency, they demanded instruments, they demanded everything, and they did. They sucked everything up, people. If you had a dollar you could eat, if you had a $20 bill, you'd starve because people couldn't make change. The money supply simply didn't exist. So middle 1930, people said, wait a minute. You mean there's no Federal Reserve notes to use? We can't do business? And a lot of people said, yeah, that's right, there's no Federal Reserve notes. And they said, well, what did we do before Federal Reserve notes? And everybody said, well, we printed our own currency. And everybody said, well, why don't we do it now? And the race was on. And guess what? People started printing local currency the way they should have been doing in the first place, and utilizing it for local trade, and that's really what got commerce in motion. It has nothing to do with all the BS with the parasites and inflation created through the Federal Reserve System. Commerce began to move in 1930 because Detroit dollars, Michigan dollars, Ford dollars, other people had currency, and by the time they were done, over 3,000 currencies were in circulation. That's the crisis of 1933 when FDR, the carpetbagger, comes in and declares war against the American people. So, all of a sudden, they declare war. Well, then we have to demand a payment on this national debt that they've created, this international debt, which was created through the Federal Reserve Act. Well, guess what? He declares that, kind of like in that Christmas story with Jimmy Stewart, okay, It's a Wonderful Life. Well, the collateral, after all, against everything that was being done, they decided that you were the collateral. And so they shuffled everything around, and they created all these new instruments, and they created all these new corporations inside the Corporation of the United States. And these provided benefits, but what it is it's the old tainted candy. It's the poison candy. Because you had to sign over your sovereignty. You had to sign over a piece of yourself unknowingly, and this self was then sold because you were being traded against. Those would be, as in the Old Testament, you would be a bondsman. You would not be a free man, you would be a bondsman. Yes, you're right, and the same kosher mafia that created the slaver mindset of old Israel was creating the slaver mindset of the new America with a K. Uh-oh. So where does this come from and how does this start? Well, for a lot of you, you didn't get into any contracts, and the Social Security scam was purely designed to have you sign over your soul, sign over your person, your corpus, in exchange for a minimal doggy treat, supposedly down the road. Now, for the people, say, born in 1933 or from 1933 on, for them there was a different state of affairs. Each individual was sold into slavery. Each individual was progressively being sold as property and traded and exchanged on the market into slavery. Others were convinced through any number of different corporate contracts to have the strawman, a fictional creature, a fictional corporate entity created parallel to you. And that fictional corporate entity is what they would use to enforce corporate law / admiralty law. An alien law to the Constitution and Bill of Rights of the United States, contrary to the common law of the nation, contrary to the common sense law of the people, but designed to bring the crown of England and the crown monarchies of Europe back in sway over the American people. You, gentlemen, as I said in the Wild Geese when he was standing on the tower there, gentlemen, we have been betrayed. Now, how do they create these bonds? And where do these bonds go? Well, first, how do they create them? Well, when you were born, and your mom was there, of course, duh, and the doctors were there, duh, or in many cases a midwife. This is one of the problems. Most Americans in 1933 were born at home. They were not born in a hospital. Oh, but we need to tell you all about the crisis of childbirth and put numbers out there which in reality were probably fictionally generated. Or, at the very least, let's put it this way, were exaggerated intentionally or emphasized to make you believe that if you didn't go to a hospital and have your baby there, you just wouldn't survive live birth. Well, neither the baby nor the mother, except, well, people have been doing that forever, or, well, we wouldn't be around in the first place. But by doing this, they brought a licensed individual. Remember, licensing is where you take a right and turn it into a privilege, licentiousness. Doctors in the medical field were being licensed. And so, as a licensed element of a corporate entity, and I hear the phone here, as a licensed entity, what happened, people, is that they became the de facto enforcers of identifying the property as it was created. And so what happened is, as you were born, a little chunk of paper was brought out. It was a manufacturer's certificate and a little ink pad, and since you weren't old enough to put your John Hancock out there, they took your little hoof, they put some ink on it, and they put your little pad on that piece of manufacturer's certificate, and they gave you as property to the state as collateral against the national debt.